Welcome to a new experience, folks. This is the first time that we've done a live screen, and it's also the first time we've actually videoed the show. So this is pretty groundbreaking, pretty nerve-wracking for my first guest doing this. Andrew, I appreciate you coming in. I appreciate the time that you're taking to have a discussion. I think it's an important discussion. If you haven't noticed, folks, Andrew is in full support of the Zags. They play at 11 o'clock today. For those of you that don't realize this is sometimes taped, but they are playing the Jackrabbits today.
Right, and thank you for pointing out my casual Thursday attire was not necessarily because I'm just lazy. I just want to support my team. I'm a Zag.
I think Spokane is Zag. So,
Right.
We've had some discussions over the last week and a half, and those discussions have surrounded a GOP rally that was put on for current President Trump, and some comments that I made, and some people took exception to some of those comments that I made, and I really thought it was a good idea for you and I to have a chat. You and I have known each other for a long time.
Yeah.
I consider you a friend.
Likewise.
And it's amazing, Andrew, how quickly these discussions and these situations turn ugly. Maybe it is just a symptom of the times that we're living in. Over the years, about the last, especially 16, I would say, because I don't think the Bush administration was immune to what's happening, and I know the Obama administration was not immune to what's happening. But it seems like the ability of Americans to have a civil discourse is almost gone. What say you?
Well, I think maybe the reason why I'm in politics as I am and in law is I don't consider it as ugly as you do, I suppose. I guess maybe I'm more used to some of the comments. And I think if you ignored the trolls or Facebook commenters on our feed, I thought the dialogue that you and I were having wasn't ugly at all. I thought it was just valuable, and I think this is important. I'm glad you brought up the stuff at the rally because it's stuff that often goes unsaid and it needs to be said and have a dialogue about it. I felt like you were giving voice to a lot of people who felt a certain way and they wanted to have someone say that out loud, as the applause you got demonstrated. And I was too. We talked a little bit before I made my public statement. But then I had enough people tell me that, this is really important for us. Not about the sheriff, it's about the issue that the sheriff raised that we want to talk about it as well and bring up our side. And so we did. And yeah, you got no argument from me that Facebook is the imperfect forum because of the fact that people can just go on and leave nasty comments. And I regretted that quite a bit. And I was always at a bind about whether do I delete them so as to keep the argument, to keep it from getting ugly, or do I leave it on? But
I found myself in the same dilemma, and I did delete some of the posts out of respect for the people that actually put them on, because after they put them on and after we had a dialogue, they started going, ooh, maybe that was a major knee-jerk reaction calling you a racist. And I'd like to chat about that later on in the show. But let's take a look at what was really said that day and kind of break it down and try to figure out, okay, what was so bad about exactly what I said?
I'd love to.
Because, folks, if you don't realize, what I said that day started out like this. Folks, a lot of people ask me how we got where we are in our country today. How did we get here? And I said, well, here's how we got here. Andrew, I come from a state that at one time was blue. The county I lived in was deep blue. And in the last 20, 25 years, that state is now red, and that county is deep red. And if you take a look at the Ohio River Valley, used to be blue, it's red. And what I said was, what President Trump tapped into in that election was people that are afraid. They're afraid for their jobs. They're afraid for their industries. They're they want their way of life back. And when the economy turned down and the Great Recession started, what I heard from Democratic leaders was this term called the new normal. And I went, okay, that's unique. It's not good, in my opinion. I really didn't think that was good. Because the message sent to the American people was, this is the way it is, get used to it. And all I could think back to was, gone really is the day of FDR standing up and going, we have nothing to fear but fear ourselves. Gone is the day that JFK said, okay, that satellite up there, well, don't worry about it. We're putting somebody on the moon. And gone is the day of Bill Clinton going, it's the economy, the new normal. And I said, Americans aren't normal. We don't think in those terms, and there's no way I want to turn this country over to my son in more shape than I got it, because it's always been that American dream, if you will, to push the country forward, the next generation to have a little bit better than the generation before it, and that is what Trump tapped into. So that was a statement. So let's just stop there and let's chat about that.
Sure.
What's your take on that? Because I want to give you a couple of examples of why I think that because of the incivility of the what's going on, it's going to really hurt not just one party but both parties in the end.
Right. I agree. I think incivility is a huge problem. There's two different issues, both what you mean to say and how one says it. And my response to you about the rally, I've not been there for the whole thing. I didn't have the full context. But it was a request, hopefully a respectful request, for you to rethink how you phrased what you meant.
Mm-hmm.
Just like if somebody has a difference of opinion on how you handle a policing issue, they can either express that opinion to you or you call you a racist. And one of them's a maybe effective way of getting through to you, one of them's a very ineffective way just to create more conflict. And I felt like I understood the underlying point you were trying to make about President Trump and President Obama, but the choice of words was more incendiary than needed to be. To say that President Obama disappointed you, everyone understands that, and then you can explain how. I think it disappointed all of us in some way or another, and then we could talk about the substance. To say that he's responsible for the deaths and the murders of police officers goes that extra level. I know you talked about the sincerity of it, and I never question your sincerity, but I would point out that Matt Shea's always sincere when he chooses his language. He just chooses it rhetoric and incendiary language that goes way farther than necessary, and everyone does. People on the commenters were probably sincere, but they chose to be mean rather than be productive.
Right.
So,
and we'll get to the Obama comment later on, but
as far as Trump
about
goes?
what Trump tapped into, because that's all I said was,
Yeah.
here's what President Trump during that election tapped into.
Right, I agree that I've actually been telling my Democratic colleagues for many months now that what we need to do is make sure there is still a party of the working people. And for a long time, that was a Democratic Party, clearly. FDR built this whole coalition on the working class. And that's been chipped away to where now the working class doesn't really have a party that they feel like they belong to. And so Donald Trump saw that and seized upon it. I would argue that he didn't really provide solutions. Even today, you see he's not following through on a lot of what he promised, like healthcare, for instance, covering everybody. But what he did do was acknowledge the problem, which many people aren't doing. You know, the trade imbalances and the jobs, and spoke and verbalized people's pain, and that is probably why he won. And so we have to, everybody has to do a better job of doing that.
Yeah, because when I look at this, there are certain elements, especially the more progressive elements, that have actually declared open war on some industries. Coal industry, number one. A lot of people don't understand why I'm so passionate about coal. Why, what's the sheriff's big deal about coal trains being able to come through and everything else? It could be because I could be considered a fourth generation coal miner. That's how I put myself through college during some of the summers. And my dad, my grandfather, and my great grandfather were coal miners. My cousins are still coal miners, and they worry. They worry about their industry, they worry about their jobs, they worry about their livelihood. And the message sent to them is you're not valued. And it is a no compromise sum here. It's coal's bad, get rid of it, period, when there are technologies that make coal very viable. So my concern is that we can't have an all or nothing discussion. All or nothing means somebody loses big in a big way. Why can't we find that common ground? Let's just pick that simple issue. Where is the missing factor of the common ground on that? Is it solely because of climate change? Because that's what truly is driving that one is, climate change. This is where we are. I'm not going to deny. Climate has changed. I can take you back to where I grew up and went, used to be trees, used to be springs, it's very dry now. Climate changed. So where is it? How can we have that discussion if it really is, it's evil, do away with it, and no discussion?
I think what history shows us is that the only way to really get someone to work with you and to stop their extremism, as you see it, is to address the urgency that's driving them to be so extreme in that position. You have to validate their concerns and let them realize that they're being heard, and then they can start talking about solutions better. But we're still in the place, the climate change thing is an emergency, and a lot of people see it as the number one priority in the entire world, and that they recognize the hardships that come with changing the way we produce energy, but frankly they weigh the two and think billions of people are going to die if we don't stop climate change versus some jobs will be lost, and they react accordingly. Other people don't see it the same way, they don't see it as dramatic, and so they don't understand why they're doing that. But if you want to speak to the people that are acting the way you're talking about, you need to address, okay, how are we going to get your issue taken care of? So I think if there's a plan in place that said, here's how we're going to get off fossil fuels in the timeline, and we can't do it tomorrow, but we can do it within a decade or two, and we got a treaty and a legal framework for that, everyone would relax and say, okay, let's do that, and then let's not be as oppositional in this stuff. But right now, people are still fighting for the culture to accept the reality of climate change and accept the importance of it. And we've even seen now the president's looking on changing the previous administration's climate change approach. That's scary to people because it could be in our own lifetimes, or at least our kids' lifetimes, that really bad stuff happens. So,
and it could, thing is the more reading that one does on the subject, the more you're starting to see some major scientists going, do we blow this one? Maybe we need to rethink what's going on here. Is it truly because of this factor, or is it because of other factors? Because about 8,000 years ago, the Earth was about 6 degrees hotter than it is now. And that's when civilization really took off and flourished. So the world has changed dramatically from ice age to warming to small ice age to warming. It'll be interesting to see in another decade where the science actually plays out on this one, because again, the more reading you do, Wall Street Journal had a good article on it. They're going, I wonder, maybe we need to step back a little and rethink this. I have a couple of questions. In order for you to do what you talked about, reach back out to the labor base, how are you going to do that when there is a very loud voice on your side, and quite frankly, it's drowning you out? A very loud voice on your side, and I'll just use one of the comments about what Trump tapped into. One of the comments, and it came from the 3rd Ledge District, one of the leaders there, PCO, that what Trump tapped into was sewage. And I'm like, okay, you just called a whole class of people sewage. How are you going to mend that fence? Because those are the fences you're going to have to mend, and those are the comments that they're always going to remember. They're going to remember each and every one of those comments that were thrown their way, and because they decided to support President Trump, they're sewage, they're racist, they're misogynist, they're blah, blah, blah. You name it, the list is very long. But I want to give you a snapshot of who these people are, because I talk to them all the time. My wife and I go to Baruchi's on Fridays. It's kind of one of our things.
Okay.
You know? And one of the servers there, really neat lady, minority, heavily supports the president. And how are you going to explain to her that, oh, we weren't meaning you? Because this is a major issue. Anytime you start leveling those type of vitriolic descriptions of people, you alienate them, and it's very difficult to bring them back from that. What's your plan on that?
Well, I think let's back up for the premise, first of all. I think one of the things that gets done by both sides quite a bit is we try to label an entire group based on their worst example. You're taking out somebody, I don't know, who doesn't speak for anybody, wasn't elected by anybody, who happened to say something very inappropriate towards Trump voters. But I've seen endless loops of people they take out at a rally for Trump, the worst person who says openly racist things.
You're not going to get
Right.
me to say that the other side, because you watched me in 2015 and 16
Right.
put on town
Right.
hall meetings in this community talking about white supremacist hate, extreme hate on both left
Right,
and
right.
right. Took a lot of heat for that.
Right.
I took a ton
You
of
did,
heat for
you
that,
did. Bravely.
but it was true. These things are happening. You know, there are some estimates that sovereign citizens kill 7 police officers a year. So it's not just one side or the other, but what is the common denominator here is radicalized hate.
Right.
And you have to be very careful about that, Andrew, because the more that these labels get pushed, because those are pretty hateful, you can't escape that. That is a pretty hateful label. The more hate gets built on, the more chance it becomes radicalized, and then people can get hurt.
Right.
So I'm really interested is, how do you want, you and I, I'm not going to put
Sure.
that on you. I'm going to
Sure.
put that on us.
Okay.
How do you and I look back at those folks and go, that was inappropriate. Don't do that. That's
Right.
just not right.
Right. What you've tapped into is the same thing, the same question I get all the time from people on the left side of the spectrum, about how Republicans and GOP and anybody expects the country to come together, when on the other side, it's not some random commentator or troll online. It's the President of the United States who is saying the things that no one can believe are being said. And after he's saying them, they're being justified and defended by people. And he actually does speak for people. He actually is someone who has the authority to say these things. So when he says that a certain class of people by race are rapists and murderers, or others are terrorists and they hate us and they need to be deported, and when he talks about, I mean, even just political opponents as Lion Ted or Little Marco and Crooked Hillary, and just does everything he can to rile people up and get people to hate for his own benefit. And he's not criticized as roughly as somebody who stood up at a town hall meeting. That makes people on my side roll their eyes, to say the least.
And from the other perspective on that, if you take a look at the fact that I hear that from the right, I hear that from the left.
Right.
You know, the term deplorable. That was Hillary.
Right.
She classified an entire group as deplorable. We can't do that anymore. You and I, again, with all sincerity, I'm going to do a town hall. I'm inviting you. I want to invite Stephanie Cates. I'm inviting Phil Tyler from the NAACP to have a discussion of how we in Spokane, I can't fix the world, but how we in Spokane can go, all right, folks, we're just not going to tolerate that. If you act this way, we're going to point it out. If you get mad at me, fine, get mad at me. But we're going to point you out, and we're going to go, not acceptable. We're going to disagree. We're going to have policy disagreements. That doesn't mean that we have to shoot each other down, because the thing that is truly missing from this country anymore is the ability for a rational discussion. You can't be rational if you're throwing hate. And Andrew, my concern really is what that hate leads to. And Kent just gave me a 4-minute warning. Would you mind doing just another segment with me? Because I think we'll get into a couple of the other comments very quickly, then focus on where I feel President Obama really let the country down and how I phrase that. Because I think those are very important discussions. But since I just said I'm going to do a town hall, I better say, would you be willing to do that?
Absolutely.
Okay.
I'd love to.
Because the truth of the matter is, the longer we let this radicalized feeling on either side continue, the more risk we are as a nation of having really bad things happen. And we've watched that time and time again play out. And I've lived through 3 presidents as sheriff now, right? And here's how the trend goes. Under the Bush administration, I had to worry about the left extremist, all right? In one shape, form, or another, because I could list all the groups. Obama gets elected, I have to worry about the right extremists, and they come in various shapes and sizes also. I went to the point of being so concerned about that I did 2 town hall meetings. And they live on YouTube. They have been memorialized for people to go and look at, because this is the result of hate. In those presentations, you'll see multiple examples of this hate turned against government. People who wear badges like I do are the biggest symbol of government, and their hate and anger and radicalized hate were turned towards the government, and they killed police officers. That was the first target. We saw a very similar thing happen from December of 14 through 16. We'll see what 17 brings, but those are the issues that if we, you and I, Stephanie and I, and for those of you that don't know who Stephanie is, she's the chair of the Republican Party, just as Andrew is the chair of the Democratic Party. If we can't get this stopped, then guess who gets caught in the middle?
Right.
And I think that you would agree that I run a fairly nonpartisan shop. I do my best to stay out of the fray. I do have my political leanings. I grew up a Democrat. My grandmother was a Democratic chair, but she and I used to have great discussions, and she always looked at me and go, "You're going to make a great Republican one day." So that's just kind of the dynamic, because given that perspective, I understand kind of both sides of it. And I can tell you what I hear from my former blue county was the party left me and they forgot about me. And that's why they switched. Folks, I think these are very, very important discussions to have. I think that these are things that we as a nation need to start having. I'm proud that we have the ability to have this. I'm proud that there are people like Andrew that are willing to sit and have these discussions. This is Sheriff Ozzie Knezovich with the Sheriff's Report. We're going to do a second segment on this. I hope you enjoyed it. Have a great day.
Thank you.